sure you know how to access that. If you have technical problems and need help understanding, if you're not hearing or not seeing, you can send us a chat in there and we'll do our best to help you solve that problem. And so that's it on the housekeeping. We're so grateful that Lydia is here hosting tonight, and we're going to turn it over to her.
Hi, thanks. So a few weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago, on a webinar, we got a lovely email immediately after from Hannah Yoon, who's on this call with us, suggesting that we get in touch with Authority Collective. And over the last few weeks, through email exchanges and then a call, Authority has put together this beautiful gallery. And if you have not had a chance to look at it yet, I'm kind of scrolling through a little bit right here, just as an introduction. 20 really beautiful, powerful images. And these images were collected from individuals who are members of Authority Collective. And those individuals were submitted a bunch of images, and then this gallery was curated by Tara and Danielle, who are here with us. So I'm going to scroll through this a tiny bit more, and then we're going to turn it over to these lovely folks who will tell us a little about themselves, about Authority Collective, about making photographs at this tender, urgent, present moment. And it's going to be a little bit more of a conversational style than an interview. That said, we will chat, they will chat for a while, maybe 45 minutes or so, half an hour, 45 minutes, and then we will go to questions. And the format tonight is any questions that you have, feel free to put them in the chat, as well as Susan will keep an eye on the chat for any technical information. Like she said, if you have any issues, just shoot a message and she'll help you. Feel free to add any questions. We will also dump some links in there as well. If you go to the Authority Collective, if you go to the gallery, the pieces we are, there's also links to every individual photographer, as well as a link directly to Authority Collective on the gallery as well. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Tara and Danielle and Hannah, and turn it over to y'all to start us out. Hi, how are ya? Oops. It's Susan, you might have to, oh, there we go.
Okay, we got it. Thank you so much for that, Lydia.
And then I will stop sharing. Oh, and as a quick reminder too to folks, you can view on grid view. If you view on speaker view, the person who's speaking will show up, and you can also pin the three individuals who are going to be doing the most of the talking. If you go to the three dots in the upper right corner of their face screen, you can pin them to the top of the grid, and then they'll stay up there if you don't want to use the speaker view. So, all right. Thanks, y'all. Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for having us. Danielle, do you want to go first, or I can go?
Oh, I can go first. Yeah, so my name is Danielle Scruggs. I'm a member of Authority Collective. I've been a board member since 2019, so since last year. I'm a photographer and a photo editor based in Chicago. And yeah, I would say the main reason I joined Authority Collective is because of its mission of supporting traditionally marginalized communities in, well, in photography, but also just like any lens-based industry. So if you're a videographer, if you do AR, VR, I just really like that mission of like particularly supporting women and non-binary people like in this industry, because there are a lot of things that need improving, like a lot of things that that we can be building on to like make this like a more fair and more equitable industry. And so so yeah, when I was asked to join as a board member, I said yes. Like it wasn't really, it wasn't really anything I had to like think too hard about or anything.
And hi, I'm Tara Pixley. I'm one of the co-founders of Authority Collective and a current board member. And just a little bit of background on myself. I have a 20-year career in visual journalism. Yeah, I got my first photo published in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution when I was 17. Very proud of that. And I worked as a staff photographer. I worked as a photo editor for Newsweek and CNN and for Creative Looping. And then I got a PhD in communication with an emphasis on visual journalism because I wanted to teach photojournalism. I really wanted to be a part of kind of educating the next generation and thinking more critically about the work that we do in the field of visual journalism. And so now I'm a professor of journalism at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, and I also am an independent or freelance photojournalist still. And I'm really honored to have the opportunity to curate this incredible body of work. The gallery, I think, is really lovely and showcases some of the work I've been so impressed by. Photographers in and around the Authority Collective community making work during COVID and during the protest movement that's happened in the last month. So really happy to be here with you all tonight and looking forward to talking more about these awesome photos.
Hi, everyone. My name's Hannah, and I'm a freelance photographer based in Philadelphia. I just moved to Philly at the end of 2018. I was originally living in Waterloo, Ontario, and then lived in Toronto for a short bit, and then moved to the US. I also am co-founder or one of the original co-founders of the Authority Collective with Tara and a few others. And it's interesting to think about where we were coming from at that point because, well, a little bit of background, I felt like we were all first meeting just to be like venting or sharing our frustrations within the industry, especially coming from Canada. I didn't feel like I had a place to really share these thoughts, or I didn't even know these thoughts were allowed, I guess, when feeling any frustration when it came to just being a person of color in the industry and then covering stories and just wanting to express that. And I found that in the people that I met in our first initial meeting. And I remember it was Tara who was like, okay, we can't just sit here and talk about these things. We actually have to do something. And so we were only with each other for like 6 or 7 hours. And at the end of the day, we founded Authority Collective. And so it's been amazing to see where it's come, so far, and how much we've been able to do. And I think most of us were strangers to one another at that time. We didn't really know each other, which I thought was really cool. And we were able to really connect and understand one another. And I think we needed that space to share our experiences as women and non-binary photographers of color in an industry that's dominated by, I guess, white men and people that just didn't look like us. So, and that gave me a huge boost to, feel confident about the work that I wanted to keep pursuing as I focused on, my own identity and what it meant to be a Canadian, Korean American. And so I've been focusing on things like that. And that's mainly it.
I love that you brought up that origin story, Hannah, because it just reminds me about the kind of need for community. And I think, Lydia, when you were talking about where the idea for 6 Feet came from, it's really just this moment when you get a few different people in the room who all are working in an industry that we love and respect and want to be better. And we also want to have community in a space of connectivity in this industry. And when I say industry, I really mean a very expansive visual media industry, right? Not just photojournalism, but also like editorial and maybe corporate and advertising. I don't want to pigeonhole the audience that might be here. I think that photography is a wide-ranging space that we all work in different ways. But that, you know, that moment that we had before becoming Authority Collective, when we were all in this room, we're talking about these experiences we'd shared across time. And I think I'm one of the older older members on the board, and like I entered the newspaper or I entered newspapers right after the turn to digital, so I just barely missed having to work with film. Thankfully, it sounds very difficult. And you know, just really kind of trying to find a space that allowed community for us, for people who had been working alone and having these, you know, often very negative experiences without the support of a group. And so Authority Collective, I think, was really born out of the idea to make a space where people could feel, I hate to use the word safe because there's all these like really negative connotations, but like can feel welcomed and heard. And AC has really grown, I think, beyond that to allow things like this, like the gallery, and you know, kind of have the opportunity to point to really awesome work that's being done by the photographers in that community. And so I, you know, maybe we can start talking about the work, but I just wanted to say that, you know, it's always community, I think, that pushes us forward towards something better and more inclusive. And so it's awesome to be a part of this, and also to get to talk to you all about like where we came from as a collective.
We're going to show the gallery.
Well,
Or do
you wanted to show some images a little bit before we went into the gallery.
Oh, okay. I was just going to talk about, I mean, this is kind of, I guess, connected to community and what happened during when the pandemic started to, I guess, become serious, like at the beginning of March. I was also able to start through Women Photograph something called WP The Journal. And I'll just show a quick screen share of our like Instagram feed, if I can do that. So along with a friend, her name's Charlotte Schmitz, we started this project called WP The Journal, and it really did come from a need for community for the Women Photograph members. And we felt like a lot of us couldn't work anymore, or we weren't sure if we were going to be working, or a lot of us were going to be staying at home. And so it turned into a project where we were put into different groups. We were taking pictures at home. Sorry, a lot of this is not at home, but and we used different themes to guide us during this time. And it really felt like it was photographers all over the world connecting through, I guess, that shared experience of being women photographers, staying at home, some of us sometimes working, but a lot of us not able to work. And what was really fascinating with the work to me that I wasn't seeing in like a lot of the publications was how intimate and how vulnerable a lot of the images were. And so I've been learning a lot about image making during this time when you're kind of limited. And I also see that in the gallery that, you know, Danielle and Tara created. So I just wanted to show that this was something that came out of the pandemic time, and how we are able to create another community and bring photographers together. And I think it gave a lot of people opportunity to make a lot of beautiful work. So that was it.
And something that was really, really fascinating, and it's showing up in the WP journal images, and it also showed up in the images that we, that Tara and I were curating. It was really fascinating to see this transition from mostly home life to images of protests and like people being in community. And I think what was, but I think like that intimacy that Hannah was talking about was still there in all those images, like even in the protest images, like we saw like a lot of like more kind of quiet and introspective moments that I thought was really fascinating. And it's something that you're not really seeing in like a lot of publications. So I'm really happy that we were able to kind of highlight that and just highlight just really, really fantastic work by just like a diverse array of people.
Yeah, that was something that we talked a lot about, Danielle and I, when we were curating these images, this gallery, is that there were a ton of photos that we could have put in. I think we narrowed it down to 20. We could have had more like 40 or 50. But really, we were trying to build a sort of visual narrative that took us through the feelings of COVID, or, you know, kind of like what we felt the experience to be and what we were seeing in the images of what that experience was. And you see in that first photo, I don't know if this is maybe a good time to go through the gallery again, but or people can maybe follow along looking at the link. But in that first image by Alexis Hunley, it's in this LA neighborhood, and you have this sort of like, it feels like the juxtaposition of the person wearing all of this personal protective equipment and the, you know, kind of sunny neighborhood around them. It's just like this very off feeling. And I feel like that captured that sense of that sort of surrealness in the beginning of you know, COVID in America, because it had been going on for quite some time before it reached like a critical moment for us here. But that, you know, just kind of thinking about what it is to have this kind of intruder. And so we kind of laughed about how this person actually in some ways feels like coronavirus, like they're just like, hello, I'm showing up, I am you know, infiltrating this whole situation. And then going to the next image, we were trying to kind of build this narrative around the, you know, again, like the outside world, like what does this mean for this absence of people now? And I think a lot of the photos we were seeing in the beginning were like this. We're like, what are these empty spaces? And look, no one is here. And then it really transitioned to these beautiful images where photographers were thinking about the home space, where I know I have 2 children, and I was homeschooling them while I was finishing up teaching at the end of the semester, and then also trying to make work and trying to reconnect with what it meant to be a photographer outside of, you know, assignments and things like this stuff really slowed down. And so seeing these beautiful images like Carmen here and this self-portrait that's coming up next by Charisse May, really just that introspection of that space that we had for a few months of quieting down and thinking about, you know, who we are, what our life looks like, and what are we doing as a community, as a country, as a, you know, as humans. And then moving through, you know, kind of the sorrow and grief. I read a lot about how it was okay to grieve because we lost our year and all of these things, that acknowledged that we're grieving and that we could grieve together and, you know, kind of, or grieve individually and really think about what that looks like. I don't want to take up all the space, like going through the whole thing. So Danielle, please jump in whenever you want to talk about a particular image.
Oh, yeah, I think like just like me, like as like a photo editor, like I'm always thinking about kind of like quieter moments. I think like I'm always just like drawn to that. Like even like as like I'm commissioning work or like looking at like what people are bringing back, even from things that could be a little bit more bombastic. And so what I liked about a lot of these images, a lot of the images that we did get, and then like as we were building this narrative, was like the intimacy and like, you know, they're very quiet moments, but they're also like really compelling. And then with Dee Dwyer, like I just really loved her images because they're so intimate, and like there's also, you're looking at how you can still find joy, like even in the middle of some really like really heavy circumstances, or, you know, sometimes even painful circumstances. And yeah, like I love Hannah's work as well. Like I just love like the stance, and I just love like their expressions, and like, you know, you can't see their faces, but you see so much, like just like from their body language, and even the fact that like the kid's coat matches the tree in the background. Like I just like really love like these moments that Hannah captured of her family, and then also of her community as well. And yeah, like just like going back to like that community aspect, like that's like what I really loved about these images too, is that like they remind us of like how connected we all are, and that, you know, we've had to like social distance, right? But I almost think like that's like not like the right term, because like we're physically distant, but like we're still all in community with each other, and like we still have like the shared experience. And then like as you proceed through the images and see people in protests, and like you see people engaging with each other, and like you see people in community to fight against, you know, like this greater injustice that's happening. Like I think like that's something that really really appealed to me about these images. And like we see, you know, we see people still creating community, and like still finding moments to not be, yeah, maybe be physically distant from each other, but not actually like socially distant. And like, you know, we still see like moments of joy, like in this graduation, people still like create like, yeah, still like going through like these rituals, and like still going through like these yeah, like people still going through like these rites of passage. That's the phrase I was looking for. Even in the middle of circumstances that have kind of like made everything kind of like topsy-turvy in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I would love to, Hannah, if you'd like to kind of talk about this and address, one of the things I loved about your images, Hannah, that you took during quarantine and, you know, throughout these dual crises, is the way you seem to be kind of walking around the neighborhood and just talking to people and engaging with them, and then getting these like really beautiful photos. Could you talk a little bit about, you know, why you started doing that and how people responded to you, or any anecdotes you have about the experience of photographing your neighborhood?
Sure. One thing I've definitely, now that it's been almost 4 full months of, you know, since when this all started, I think there was a huge, and it might sound dramatic, but it was kind of like an identity crisis, because being like a freelance photojournalist, I'm used to getting phone calls, going on assignments, or working on personal projects and pitching them. And like, I thought I don't know, that was just the regular way of doing this. And so now when I found myself at home, I was like, who or what am I taking pictures of now, you know? So it's either my husband or me, I guess. And then I just started looking outside the window. We moved to a new neighborhood, and I would look outside the window, or if I was driving around just in my neighborhood, I would want to take pictures of people that I was seeing. And I thought that was one way to start connecting with people in the area that I lived in. And this is all like this picture here wasn't from an assignment. It was just me. There's this one big street in Philadelphia in my neighborhood. And I just started kind of driving up and down and walking around and meeting different people along here. And I would also do it in my neighborhood. I would just sit outside, like I would look outside my window, and if I saw someone interesting, I would run outside and just approach them and ask to take a picture. And I had to kind of unlearn, I guess, what it meant to be a photographer and what it meant to be a storyteller during this time, because I felt like a lot of my identity was based on getting a call from an editor. And I think I was learning to assign myself work and be curious about the people that were near me, which I thought was important. And it really, like, there's this, I wish I sent this picture in, but it's this man who would always walk like 4 dogs. And I kept seeing him, and I was like a bit nervous about approaching him. And then I did. And now every day when he walks his dogs, he'll say hi. We'll both say hi to each other because we live on the same street. And yeah, I think it's opened up a different way for me to connect with people, because with assignments, I'm getting sent to actually not my own neighborhood. You know, it's somewhere else in Philly, or it's in Jersey or in Delaware or somewhere else in Pennsylvania, and it's like, you know, I'm with them for an hour or so, and then I come back home, and that's it. Whereas the people that I was meeting during like, you know, shelter in place time, I feel like I got their emails, and I know where they live near me, and so I know they're people that I could possibly see again and probably build relationships with. So I thought that was a really interesting thing to be happening during this time, where I know there are other photographers who were working a lot, you know, when the pandemic like was in its height, you know, back in March and April. But I felt like I needed to find a different way to make work and be okay that my identity wasn't only based on getting a call from like the New York Times or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's such an excellent point, because so much of the work that I have seen in the journal, in this piece and several other kind of like online exhibitions, and looking through the, you know, Instagram feeds of a lot of photographers who I follow, it's so evident, this shift to, you know, it's like it seems like a sort of cognitive shift and a visual narrative shift, where I'm just seeing so much more work made around the neighborhood, around the home space, like really thinking about community. You know, obviously this is something that we're all grappling with, and of course we keep mentioning community, but like that search for community when you don't have it built in, when you have to kind of slow down and figure out what that looks like, and how that becomes really paying attention to our own neighborhoods, to the spaces that we have like rushed in and out of and taken for granted to some degree, seeing the stories that exist there and the people who are, you know, next door, down the street, living these really interesting lives that we maybe haven't taken the time to kind of stop and photograph or talk to. And so I hope that this is something that we're going to keep seeing more of, like more photographers turning their cameras toward the space that they exist in, and thinking about the stories that we're always surrounded by, rather than always thinking the story is out there beyond us, beyond where we live, and that we have to go to it or find those things. Because that, I think, is really how we end up with a lot of similar imagery, how we end up with like stereotypical narratives, because we're always trying to find this story that exists somewhere else in someone else's community, and imagining that space is the place where stories are, instead of understanding ourselves as part of like a diverse and interesting, you know, universe of stories happening right around us.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really excellent segue to maybe talk a little bit about some of the resources that Authority Collective has prepared, especially guides to photographers about how, when, and where to make photographs, and the agency and respect and relationship building that goes into that, because I feel like so much of what your collective is offering through these resource materials is a long-term collaborative effort for all photographers to recognize those environments and planes of existence and potentials for self-examination in the process. Can you talk a little bit about the guide for photographers?
Yeah, absolutely. I can start, because I worked on that project. So Authority Collective was in collaboration, or worked rather in collaboration with Photo Shelter, to produce the Guide to Inclusive Photography. And I worked on that with Javel Tamayo, who I think is on the call here, another AC co-founder and board member. And what Authority Collective wanted to do with that guide is offer like all of this knowledge that we have, that we're talking about amongst ourselves as women, non-binary and transgender photographers of color, who've been working as marginalized photographers in this industry, that again, we love and respect. Obviously, we're part of it. You know, some of us have been doing it for a very long time, as I mentioned, 2 decades. So we're really invested in making the industry better, and also making it more possible for different kinds of people to enter the industry. So with that in mind, you know, it really we have to do the work, I think, of educating people about what we mean by diversity of perspectives. What do we mean by decolonize and inclusive practices? We're throwing those words around a lot, but maybe not taking the time to fully educate people who don't have access to those experiences. So that's what we wanted to do with Photo Shelter, was really write a guidebook that introduced these concepts and tried to make them like accessible. And it can be hard, I think, to hear a lot of the information that we have to give in terms of the experiences we've had as marginalized photographers working in the industry, or some of the knowledges that we have that people haven't seen or heard or experienced before. So that guidebook was talking about, how do you photograph race? How do you photograph gender and sexuality? And when I say how do you photograph, it's more like, how do you think about your photographic process? What are you doing as a photographer when you enter these communities that are outside of your own? What are we doing as Westerners, as Americans, or potentially Europeans, when we go into areas in the global South? That was one of the chapters, is photographing the global South. Are we reproducing these kinds of very harmful stereotypical visual narratives when we're photographing Indigenous communities? Are we emphasizing the headdresses and things like that, instead of thinking about Indigenous communities as eating dinner together, as celebrating a birthday party, like just things that are moments of connectivity rather than moments of exoticism. It's like I always tell my students, people who grow up in New York City don't feel the need to photograph the subway train all the time because it's not exotic to them. And then you see people who come and they're just like, oh my gosh, the subway train, and they're photographing it all the time. So if we take that step back and we think about the work that we're doing in photography, am I taking this picture because it's so unique to me, or am I taking this picture because it really tells an important, interesting, and different visual story? So a lot of those conversations were in that guidebook, and also resources like anti-racist and anti-oppressive reading lists, resources to ask ourselves questions as photographers before we start or while we're working with certain communities, and really just trying to encourage, again, in an accessible way, people to think about their practice in new and more informative and inclusive approaches to the photographic space.
As someone
I don't know if Hannah or Danielle wants to add to that.
Danielle and Hannah to weigh in also, and I just want to add, like, as someone who lives in the global South and is Appalachian by choice, that chapter is really powerful, especially at this moment. It's so easy to take the dominant narrative and ride that, and I think that some of the way that y'all presented all of that information, and especially with my own experience in the South, just was super powerful, and definitely held up a mirror to a lot of work that I see.
And yeah, and just to that point, I think the most important thing to remember too is that, like, when we talk about changing our thinking around how we portray like different kinds of communities, like that we may not belong to, is that it's not like diversity for diversity's sake, or it's not just like do this thing because it's like a trendy thing to do or whatever. It's like it's really about, like, how can you like holistically think about the work you're creating, and like what's going to be the effect of that work when it's out in the world, and like, do you want it to be part of this continuum that's really been harmful to communities, or do you want to kind of be part of like a new narrative that like really kind of enriches or like tells like a more complete story about this community? So I think like that's something to keep in mind too, is that like this leads to better journalism, like it leads to better documentary photography, or like it leads to better commercial work, like whatever kind of genre of photography you're in, like kind of following these kind of guidelines and like really listening to people from communities that you're photographing that you may not necessarily be a part of, but like you are documenting it for whatever reason, like this is gonna, like, kind of thinking through like how your work is gonna live in the world, like only makes that work that much richer and that much stronger.
Yeah, even for me, like when I saw the guide come out, it was super helpful, because I've only been practicing, full time for 3 years. And I, like, when I went to school, I think it was in 2012, I graduated in 2014, and something like this would have been super helpful, being a student and learning from, because we were just fed, certain images. So when I did like my history of photojournalism class, we looked at Magnum photographers, and that was kind of like what we looked at. And we looked at who's it? I'm gonna forget his name, but he did the Americas. Is it Robert Frank?
Robert Frank.
Oh,
Robert.
Okay, good. Yes, and so like his. I mean, it's amazing work, but that was just like, he was kind of someone that we were told to look up to. And I remember, I didn't think we looked at a single like person of color in class, as when I looked at the history of photojournalism. And so I think a guide like this, to me, even like being someone part of Authority Collective, is super helpful for me to unlearn a lot of practices that I was taught, or what I thought was like the standard when it comes to, whether it's winning a prize or getting on A1 or whatever. I think it's a super helpful guide to help unlearn, I think, a lot of old ways of approaching visual storytelling. And I feel like that's connected to even what's happening now with, covering protests. Because I haven't covered any, and people keep asking me if I am or if I'm going to, and I've just decided not to. And for me, it made sense for me to take a step back during this time. And in Philly, we have so many amazing like Black photographers who are covering it. And I was like, I don't need to be out there. I can just be like, observing, learning, listening. And I didn't feel like I needed to add, I guess, another image when there's a lot of other great work going on.
I think something that matters a lot to me to convey through things like the guide to inclusive photography, and also the photo bill of rights, a recent intervention the Authority Collective was a participant and an author on. These things are all about your approach as an individual, right? It's about how we think about ourselves and how we think about the communities and the people that we're photographing. It's not demands. It's not saying you have to do this thing, you shouldn't be in this community, or you should. It really is like, hey, you want to tell a story, you think it's important, and there are many other people who could benefit from seeing these images, then that's cool. Here are some things to think about that we should all be thinking about. We should all care about it, because if we're taking images to share with, an imagined audience, then an imagined public, like I identify as a photojournalist, and I identify really hard that way. I care so much about journalism and have heroicized it since a young age. So to me, it really matters that I'm in service, like the work that I'm doing, either as a photojournalist or as a photo editor, that I'm in service to educating or informing the public about these things that matter, that I'm holding power structures and individuals accountable. Those are the tenets of journalism, right? So how can I do that if I am not starting with myself? If I'm not walking into a space saying, well, what sort of hierarchies and power do I hold right now with this camera, in this, the choice, the option to enter this space, and what I can do with my camera and my access to publishing these images, publishing captions, and my perspective on things. So that it really is a guide. It's a helpful way of thinking about who we are, what we do, and how we can do it better. And so I hope that it has been useful, or will be useful for some time to come as we all just kind of shift toward a more thoughtful approach to photography and ourselves as photographers.
It's certainly been all of the feedback of folks that I know who have looked at the guide or the Bill of Rights so far. Folks have had these kind of like mind-blowing experiences, and even like Hannah was saying, self-reflection and having those moments like step up and step back and how do I fit into this equation, and really critical thinking about the problematic history of photography, and then what we can do in this moment to either unwillingly uphold it or to actively decide to not be complicit and then move forward. And it's like a, I think I said this earlier when we were talking, like a barometer, like it's just kind of over here at a constant check-in. I have a question that we actually didn't talk about, but you all were talking about photo history and this just popped into my head. I'm really curious if the three of you all have had moments where you've discovered a photographer that wasn't canon to you, or a photograph that you've come across in your own practice where you've thought, holy shit, how is this not taught everywhere? Or how is this photograph not the ultimate example of this, or this photograph or this lens-based person kind of changed the way that you work, that you wish that everybody taught in every intro or history photo class? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
For me, oh, like actually I was thinking about this when I don't remember now if it was Hannah or Danielle who was talking about the or Hannah, yes, like not being taught the full like gamut of photographers in our history. I didn't learn about Roy de Carava's work until I was much older. It definitely was not. I think maybe it came up when I was doing my MFA in photography, and I did hear about Gordon Parks. I feel like Gordon Parks is like one of the few photographers that gets thrown out there a lot, but just realizing that there were several others that we know of, right? I'm sure there were hundreds of Black and brown photographers and female photographers whose work not just didn't make it into the canon, but didn't make it anywhere because they couldn't get published because of the power structures at play at the time. And I saw someone said in the chat about Robert Frank, it's interesting to mention Robert Frank since he was photographing a country and a culture other than his own. And I think that's an excellent point because Robert Frank had such an interesting perspective. I love his work. And I think that it's really important to see outsider perspectives. It's also important to see insider perspectives. And it's, kind of frustrating and frankly, a huge loss for history that while Robert Frank was able to come to America and freely move around the country to photograph things, the Black Americans and Mexican Americans, Chinese Americans, people who had been working and living in this country for years and years and years, their perspective and their visual understanding of their world, their stories, they didn't have the opportunity to portray those things. And so as we acknowledge that the work of Robert Frank is important, we can also use that as a jumping off point to think about what's missing from the canon. What perspectives have we actually never seen, and sadly we'll never see, possibly. I hope there's some treasure trove waiting to be discovered out there of photography by the people who were more commonly being photographed in the early 1900s and for most of most of our time in this country, right? So I think that's what matters about like these conversations around diversity and equity and inclusion. It's about including perspectives that we haven't seen. It's not about excluding perspectives that we have seen, right? It's about how do we make this room big enough to fit us all so that we can do the work that we want to do, which is showcase everyone's view of the world. Like, it would be amazing to see so many different perspectives on something. That's how we can learn and grow as humans, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, I also love Roy DeCarava. Actually, I guess I have like a different, um, I had like a slightly different experience because I went to an HBCU, to historic Black college, and so when I took history of photography, like my professor, like very purposely showcased work by African American photographers who were working in the late 19th and early 20th century. And so like I found, so that this class was like where I first found out about Word de Carava. And that was so helpful to like see work like that, because I didn't, up until that point, I thought, well, maybe I can't really be a photographer because, you know, my work isn't like, I knew even back then my work is very quiet and it's like very, it's not really very in your face. And so when I saw his work, I was like, oh, okay, this is possible. Like I can do this. And so that's like what's really important too about like like creating like a more complete canon, right? Like it's not about like saying no white photographers ever. Like no one's saying that. Like it's just more so saying like how can we tell a more complete picture and a more complete history and include all different kinds of perspectives. Like in that same history of photography class, that's like where I found out about Addison Scurlock, who's a DC-based photographer, had his own studio like back in like the 40s and 50s. And so, you know, and then like, I think about like, well, what if everyone had that education? And like, what if that was just the standard education where like everyone knows like who these people are? And, you know, of course, like I still had like so much to learn as well, because there was like another photographer I recently found out about, Ming Smith, who has been doing amazing work for like the past like almost 50 years, but like I just didn't know, because again, like that history isn't always, that history that we learn isn't always a complete one. And so that just goes to show that we all are constantly learning, and like we all are constantly discovering, you know, like additions to the canon, or like who should be canon already. So so yeah, I hope that that's like really clear, that like we just need to like keep having these conversations and like keep emphasizing that there are like all these perspectives out there that like, you know, they weren't known necessarily before, but that doesn't mean that like they're not just as important as these like other kind of like historical figures that we've learned about.
I see we have 2 questions in the chat. Maybe respond to those.
Yeah.
I wanted to respond to Wesley's question.
Yeah. I'll read it out loud for everybody. So Wesley is saying, so there's been a lot of talk about freelancers turning down assignments to cover the Black Lives Matter protests. And this is kind of a multi-part question. How can we continue to work with editors to continue conversations of representation after the protests are over? Given that the majority of coverage recently has been protests, my decision to turn down these assignments hurt my income in June and has resulted in getting less calls even as other features reemerge. So how can we sustainably do this work? Wesley's also disclaiming that he is a white man, by the way. So thank you, Wesley. So kind of 2 questions. A, you know, how can we continue to work with editors on the questions, and then also how do we sustainably work long term?
So I wanted to grab this or first maybe. This is, I think, a really tricky one, and I want to just come out and say that I'm speaking here as Tara Pixley, not as, you know, for all of Black photographers everywhere, or female photographers everywhere. This is my personal opinion, and I say that disclaimer because a lot of times the opinions of minorities gets taken up as like, well, this Black person said this, so it's okay, and no, this is what I think. I think that we need to get away from this sort of all or nothing mentality where it's like, okay, we've had this one perspective for a really long time that has dominated our visual narratives, and that has been the white Western cis man. And we don't need to do away with that. Like I was saying, it's on the exclusion of that perspective. So I think I want to see what what your take is on the protests, as I also want to see what this Black female photographer's take is on the protests, what this, you know, Asian man's, like, you know, imagine all of the different genders and sexualities and races, basically all the different backgrounds and perspectives and knowledge bases. I want to see how that story gets told from these different angles. So for me, it really isn't about like, you should be giving up your livelihood. Like, you've got to eat, and I think you should, and I support that fully, and I think many people will. I think it's about balancing that out. So it's like, I keep telling this anecdote. A friend of mine told me that they had the experience of watching a photographer speaking on a webinar early on in COVID, during the COVID crisis. And they were saying, well, I've been photographing every single day. We did the math on their typical clients, which we can see because it's getting published. And knowing those rates, that person was making anywhere from $10,000 to $12,000 that month. So you got to eat, and all is over here, and you got to take the work from every other person and only have one visual perspective is over here. And I think trying to find that like nice medium where you're like, you know, I photographed the protest last week and I'm making rent this month. Maybe I can push this to a woman of color or person of color and say, hey, I noticed that you haven't had your work in the Wall Street Journal yet, so maybe I've connected you with the editor. Like, that's building community. It's advancing the opportunities in your industry, because when you do that for someone, they're going to do it for you as well, right? Like, every time I've given a job away, I've gotten something back tenfold, which I'm not saying to do things because of that, but you give what you get back what you give out, right? So if we're giving out generosity, consideration towards the people we photograph and our colleagues in photography, then we're going to receive that wonderful community and kindness and generosity in return. And as we're doing that, we're literally making our industry better, because we're making space for other ways of seeing the world. So it makes us better as photographers, it makes the story stronger, and it makes our audiences better educated. I think it's like a win-win-win-win.
Do Hannah or Danielle, do y'all want to add to that, or should we move on to the other question that we have?
I agree. So
Yeah. I don't think I could say it better.
no.
Yeah, that was pretty like mic drop. So from Jessie Barber, Jessie is asking, how do we vet and or edit our work to ensure, so this is, you know, the inclusive guide to photographers kind of in that conversation. How do we vet our work to ensure that our good intentions, quotation, are transferred into the published material to fairly truthfully represent the community being documented? Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think also there can, like, another deeper level of that too is like, how do you build trust with the publications and editors to ensure that in perpetuity that that the good intentions are being upheld? Yeah.
I mean, I can answer from a photographer's perspective. I mean, I don't know if I do this right all the time, but I make sure, especially if it's an assignment or commissioned work, I like to talk to my editors about what I was seeing, even if it isn't, you might see things in pictures, but I want to also describe what I was feeling, who I was talking to. Some people, you know, that we meet are off the record. Like, they don't want to be photographed. They don't want to be quoted, but I still like remember what they say. So I like to communicate that with the editors when it comes to wanting the whole story, I guess, to be presented. And it's hard sometimes, I feel like, when it comes to an assignment, because like I don't know what the writer is going to write. But I know I do my best to write like extended captions, and I get on a call with the editor and explain like what I was feeling, what I was seeing, what people were telling me. I don't know if that helps, but I think, and like building that relationship with the editor, trusting that they're also going to visually show it in a way that does, you know, that's fair to the community. But I'd like to hear from, I guess, like the editor's perspective.
Yeah, what you were just saying, like that's, I think like having conversations is really key. Just like talking from my perspective as a photo editor, like I really love it when photographers write extended captions because like that helps me get more context. If you need to, if it's an especially sensitive story, like, you know, I'll definitely like hop on a call and just say like, hey, like let's like talk through this. Like tell me like, you know, what were you seeing? You know, if I, especially like if I notice, because this actually has happened before where like I've gotten photos back from a photographer where we did have a conversation before, but then the photos that they brought back were, I would just say like they didn't tell as complete of a story as I thought that they could. And so we had a conversation about that, and you know, we talked about like here's like how like, you know, you could portray this better next time, or like here's like what you could do to like make this like a more complete story, or like here's like how what you can do to like kind of bring some visual balance to like to the photos that that you submitted. So yeah, I think like definitely like having those conversations, and you know, if you need to have like more than one before like you go on an assignment, or like you know, have more than one after you come back, I think like that's really great to do as well. And yeah, like I think like really like communication is like really like, you can really never have too much communication. Even if you think like, am I talking too much? You're probably not. So it's okay. And then also like make sure like you're having those same conversations with the community that you're covering as well. So like if there, you know, if there are like certain ways that people want to be photographed, or there's certain ways people don't want to be photographed, like, you know, have that conversation with them as well. And like that will, like people appreciate that too, because like a lot of times like people don't get asked that. So I think like if you know, open up that line as well, like they're like people are going to respond to that.
Yeah, I want to co-sign everything Hannah and Danielle just said, but oh, there's an echo. Okay, but also maybe add that I think this is a threefold process. It is talking with the people you're photographing, especially if you're telling long form stories. So you should have the opportunity to really get a good idea of what a fair and truthful representation is, you know, as it's unfolding. But it's also about, like, I think many of us can attest to taking images that end up telling a different story than what might have been happening, you know, and sometimes having things in relationship to one another in the frame ends up with very interesting moments, and sometimes it ends up with misleading moments. And so being really intentional and thoughtful with your captions, being careful not to include photos that, if those were the ones that were selected, would misrepresent what was happening. I think you should shoot widely, right? You should take a huge swath of what is happening to tell as complete a story as possible. And then when you sit down to do your own edit, before you're turning images over to an editor and, you know, kind of out of your hands, like, don't turn in the photos that you feel weird about. And I know that I've had moments like that where I'm like, if this is the one that they picked to run, I don't know. And since we don't always have a say, the photo editors, you know, ultimately have the final say. Thinking about that stuff ahead of time is really important. And then I would also say that you need to educate yourself. Like, we really need to be educated about what are these stereotypes, like what are the visual rhetorics that we're pulling from, these like historical ways of thinking about Black and brown people, the global South, indigenous communities, all of these different marginalized and often misrepresented or underrepresented spaces. If we're educated about those communities, how they've been misrepresented, what is the visual rhetoric around these communities and individuals, then we're going to recognize that even if it happens kind of accidentally in our own work. So you're thinking about it on the front end as you approach the communities, and you're trying to avoid, you know, telling these really, like, frankly boring and played out stories. Like, tell a more complex and unique and visually interesting story. And so if then you're doing that work, and then in your edit you're like, is this doing more of this over here that I know is going to play into this kind of idea rather than this more like complex storytelling. And then you're making that choice to not even leave it in the editor's hands. And then we also have to have the conversation with the editors, like you both were saying, that communication is really important. And this is also why I think that it's really important to have photo editors who are advocating for compelling, accurate, holistic storytelling. We really need to get more photo editors who are doing that work, because it's not just up to the photographers. It's frustrating to see how things get played sometimes in publications that, and especially having been a photo editor before, I'm like, why did you make that choice? So I'm really careful about the images that I turn in, because I know that power is leaving me, like the option to kind of have a say in it. So yeah.
That's we had a beautiful webinar that Mike organized. Mike's been doing these conversations called Between Us, where he brings a few people in from different disciplines to talk. But early on, we had a conversation with Natalie Kesar, I don't know how to pronounce her last name. And she spoke to what you were just talking about, Tara, which is like, know when to not take the photograph, know when to recognize that moment is telling a different story than maybe what you're trying to tell or what is appropriate. And then as you're editing to share those images, recognizing that if an image is not clear, if there's ambiguity in it, or if it could go in another direction or whatever, to recognize that that's not like ethical, maybe is a heavy word to use, but that the ethics of the edit and the selection before they even get to the editor is a really thoughtful and important process for photographers to recognize. It's agency and autonomy and power in there, certainly. She wrote about it on her Instagram as well. There's a really beautiful photograph. So I have one more question, and I know, Tara, you have to go soon, and I want to be conscious of everyone's time, but I'm curious, because we've talked so much about community and our own practice and how it's changed since COVID, and also as a result of the protests. How has, for each of you, how has your practice and your understanding of your own community, your immediate surroundings and your environment, and then your feelings about intimacy, how have those things changed? The premise for 6 feet, of course, when we started, Susan came to Mike and me and kind of proposed this, like, yeah, we're being asked to keep 6 feet away from one another. And in a lot of ways, 6 feet is a large distance. And then photographically speaking, 6 feet can be really intimate. And you all kind of spoke a little bit to that, like turning those lenses inward and looking at your immediate community and getting to know your neighbors. So yeah, has there been a moment where you've realized, like, oh, my practice has changed, or the way that I view my home has changed in the last couple of months of this time?
That's a good question.
I love the poetic shit, y'all. Sorry.
I mean, I can definitely speak to that. I've been quarantined with my 2 children, a 10-year-old and a 14-year-old. My partner, who worked in television, so she, effectively lost her job during this, and our roommate, who also works in television, so also lost her job. So I was the only person working. Oh, and 2 cats and a dog. So it's been a very intense kind of 3.5, 4 months, and really trying to kind of figure out how to. Oh, sorry. There's hearing myself. Oh, okay. Thanks. Thank you. So I really never was someone who was interested in photographing my home life or, my kids a lot. Like I did that to begin with when they were younger, and posted, Instagram or iPhone photos rather. So this time has really been a transition for me to move into photographing photographing my home space and photographing like these little moments that happen. Actually, I photographed my son. He asked me to cut his hair a couple of weeks into quarantine, and as I was cutting his hair, I said, oh, you know what, this is a really cool moment, I want to photograph it. And so I took pictures of it, and those ended up being highlighted in both the Women Photograph Journal project, and it was published as part of this ad campaign with Procter and Gamble, which was totally random. But so I've actually been finding this sort of different way of relating to both my children and like our family, and also to photography. And it's been a really nice sort of journey. I'm excited to get out of the house and photograph other humans again, for sure. I mean, not that I haven't been doing that. I have been in recent weeks with the protests, but it's been nice to focus on them. Oh, there it is. Okay. Thanks, Internet. So that was one of the images, and then there was another one that was used in the Procter & Gamble ad campaign. We've done a lot of hair cutting and photographing hair cutting actually during quarantine.
I think I kind of talked about it earlier, but it has been definitely a time for me to rethink my process and approach to photography, and also being at home with my husband a lot has been also a change, because I'm used to working at home alone. And so luckily we moved to a new home like during the pandemic, and so we did have some like space, but I was still not used to having like another being around me all day. So that took some time. But then, and also getting comfortable, like Tara said, I didn't really care to photograph my personal life, or like share that much of it with people on the internet or whoever. So I slowly started doing it, mainly because we started the journal, and I noticed a lot of people were doing it, and I was like, okay, maybe I'll start trying. And then on top of that, like, you know, photographing my neighbors. I just found the picture of, I can screen share it, of my neighbor with the dogs. Just seeing someone like him walking around was really, you know, it was like really fun to just meet someone new in my neighborhood that I just moved to. And again, I think it helped me to slow down these past few months when it came to taking pictures, and rethink the process and my approach of what it means to be creating work. And I think I'm still trying to figure that out. But again, like I said earlier, not being dependent on calls from an editor or even personal projects, because I would call them personal projects, but they were never personal to me. They were still of other people. And so I think this was a time for me to be more personal and more reflective, and hoping like when it comes to assignments, I'm bringing that in as well.
We also love this image. Oh, sorry. I don't want to.
Oh,
I
go
just
ahead.
wanted to say that I love that photo of yours, Hannah. We actually like struggled like to use that one or the two that ended up going in. There's something just like really, really lovely about this moment and the intensity of his gaze.
And just like the light and the expression of the dogs as well, like one of those like weeping for joy. Yeah, so that was definitely you made it hard for us. Yeah, with a lot of like a lot to narrow down. So yeah. And yeah, I guess like I would say well, I mean, I've always kind of done introspective work. Like I've done, when I was younger especially, like I did like a lot of self-portraits and like a lot of photos of like my home life, and I stopped that when I started working more as a photo editor and working more as a photojournalist as well. And so when shelter in place started happening, I kind of went back to that practice. And I think I think like that's also kind of taught me that like it's okay to like not feel like every single image has to be perfect all the time, and that like it's a waste of time if it's not a perfect image. It's like I think like I think like slowing down and like kind of getting back into that practice that I used to do before like really kind of helped me see that like yeah, like you don't have to strive for perfection necessarily. Like you can just strive to tell a story or just strive to convey a feeling or like just kind of get some certain feelings out. And so, and I think like that's helped me just like with, and then when I did start getting kind of slowly getting back into assignment photography, I think like that did kind of help me kind of be a little bit more relaxed on assignments and like, yeah, kind of like reshift my focus. And so it's like, okay, like I'm not trying to like make a perfect image or like see like, okay, like how are they going to place this or whatever. It's just like, okay, I'm here, I'm present. Let me just like try to tell this story as best as I can. And then everything else is kind of out of my hands. So.
Yes, y'all. So lovely. Um, well, we have a couple minutes left. Oh yeah, this is all sorts of echoey. I'm gonna mute y'all for a second. We have a couple minutes left, but if there are no other questions, personally, I want to say I'm incredibly humbled and honored to have you all. It's been really wonderful, and I'm so grateful for you to not only take the time to join us tonight, but I know the editing process, especially when there are so many, I mean, like seeing that other image of Hannah's, I want to see a second gallery. I also, I know I shared this with y'all in email, but I want to invite anybody else who is part of Authority Collective who's on the call right now. We're always taking submissions of single images, of bodies of work, of proposals for galleries or webinars. So if you were really inspired by something we talked about, or you got kind of that thread of an idea and you say, oh, I want to do a gallery of all dog walking or whatever it is, we're so here for it. We're so open to collaboration and opening up the platform to as expansive and weird or intimate or whatever that you want to get. So yeah, I hope that folks have gotten their gears turning and that there's going to be some more exciting stuff coming up. Is there anything else that y'all are that you feel like you want to share or that we missed, or a great clever sign off?
I don't have the clever sign off, but we didn't end up really talking a lot about the protest images that the gallery segues into. And we probably don't have time to get into that. But I did want to point out that one of the images, Sarah Beth Maney's photo of the graduating senior who has his fist up, it was turned into a wall mural, like this giant size wall mural in Oakland, I believe. I saw that on her Instagram earlier this week, and I just thought it was so beautiful and also just so powerful to see this sort of conversation happen between photojournalism, between these images that Sarah Beth Maney, who is a photographer in the Bay Area, took of the protests, and then seeing that get reframed and posted in, or not posted, but like made into art in this public space, and showing the ways that we can kind of move through storytelling and visualizing moments, and just the power of photography to connect people. So I really love that. Recommend everyone check it out. Yes, this image.
Hannah,
so it's really powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, that's.
I saw this. So I'm out on the West Coast visiting family, so I got to see it live. Like I got to see it after it had been finished, and I think earlier on Saturday they did like a high school grad ceremony in front of the mural. So I just love that it involved the whole community. Like this one picture reached to so many people and brought the city of Oakland together. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so much there's so much in this image, right? Like you have the graduation hat or whatever you call those things, and the tassel and the mask and the shirt and the SWAT gear, the riot gear. You know, it's just, it's everything that we need in this moment. And it also is a conversation starter and a question asker. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. Danielle, I can't unmute Danielle. Susan, will you unmute her? I don't know why it won't let me do it. Thanks.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I also don't have a clever sign off either. But I just want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. And also I want to, thank you for giving us this opportunity to share all this amazing work and talk about it tonight. So yeah, just thank you.
Yeah, I also want to thank everyone for
you.
being here. Thank you all, and please do share the gallery of images far and wide. All of those photographers are women and non-binary photographers who are working in America during these crises, and so we'd love to, amplify their work and keep amplifying the work of a diverse body of photographers. Thank you all again.
Heck yeah, and so somebody added the link to the mural, which is in the contact list. Also, just a quick shout out to Francis's webinar on Thursday night, a conversation about the body of photography, which I think so much of what we've talked about tonight about intimacy is like gonna fold right into that conversation as well. And you're all part of the family now, so hanging out with us, and we're here for anything that we want to, any place that we want to take this further. So thank you all. This has been delightful.
Delightful. Thank you, Lydia.
This is the fun kind of where everybody hangs out to see what's going to happen for the next 5 minutes as people slowly.
Right. They're like, is that the last thank you? Are we done? No? Okay.
Cool.
I am going to sign off. I have to head out for an assignment, but thank you all again. Looking forward to the next 6 Feet webinar. And stay safe out there, y'all. Coronavirus is still a thing. Wear a mask. That's my clever sign off. Wear a mask.
Oh.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, and then bye, and then you keep seeing them in the grocery store aisles as you walk by, and you're like, oh, hey.
Yeah. Thanks, Lydia, for hosting this.
Bye, y'all. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right.
Hello. That was so great.
My heart is so overflowing and full right now. That's so good. And also like one of those conversations that's both like really satisfying, but also leaves me with all of these other questions that I want to go out and try to answer through making pictures, you know?
Absolutely.
Whew. Thanks. All right. I guess we'll talk tomorrow.
Oh, so sometimes you were a co-host and you initiated the recording, so it might start downloading to your computer, not mine.
Ooh,
I don't know if you said record to the computer or record to the cloud. But so anyway, just watch it. What'll happen is when we sign out and it's all done, you'll see a little pop up on your screen and it'll start like downloading, and just try to find where it put it.
And then send it to you.
And then you can drag it just into the Google Drive or whatever you want to do with it. Really, the fastest thing to do with it is just to drag it over to our YouTube account. And you just drag it into there and then put it as private, and then I'll go in and put the little title at the beginning.
Okay.
And that kind of thing. Because I don't think we need to do any editing, because I think you started recording like right at the beginning. Well, except for this part, we'll need to record out this part because we're still talking.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I'll
Okay.
try to do that. If I can't do it, I'll just put it in the drive.
Yep.
And yeah,
Yeah.
this is real.
Cool.
All right. See you soon.
All right. Bye.